Alrighty, so I think I'm hopped up on enough medication now to actually be able to talk about this deck. I have not been able to breathe for the last few hours, but a combination of Dayquil and a nasal spray is hopefully going to get me through this, because I really, really want to talk about this deck. So this is Satoru Umezawa, and the strategy we're going to be going with is basically flinging in giant creatures that our opponents are not going to be able to deal with. This deck idea came basically because there is a person who works at my local card shop, and they had a Satoru Umezawa deck that they tried to play as basically Ninja Tribal, and then it didn't work very well. And it, just in the middle of a Buffalo Wild Wings, when everybody was hanging out after the card shop, he had me go through the deck and update it with my deck building archive, which I need to actually, sidebar, I need to make a video about how to build a commander deck building archive. So that's a thing for later. I'll work on that later. But this is Satoru Umezawa. And his ability is whenever you activate a ninjutsu ability, you can look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. You can do that once each turn. But his big ability, the biggest thing he does for us, is he says each creature card in your hand has ninjutsu 4. So you pay a blue, a black, and 2 colorless, and then you can throw the creature into the battlefield. So what ninjutsu does, anytime that you have a creature that is considered unblockable, and that creature manages to, be considered not blocked by the opponent, you can pay ninjutsu, and it will allow you to freely put any creature from your hand onto the battlefield without paying its mana cost. So these are all the evasive ninjas. Expendable Lackey. This card just, it does nothing on its own. But if it's in the graveyard, then we can exile it to create a blue fish token that has the creature can't be blocked at sorcery speed. So basically, we're dropping this down for 1, and then we're throwing it at our opponents and threatening them, going, hey, if you block it, then I'm just going to make the fish lackey. And if you don't block it, then I'm just going to do the ninjutsu. Either way, I'm getting an unblockable creature. Oopsie doopsie. Eye Collector. It has flying, and it has a when it deals damage ability that we'll never use. Lantern Bearer has flying and is a 1/1 for 1. However, it has Disturb. We can make an enchanted creature gain flying, and we can do that when it's in the graveyard. We're going to use this to reinforce one of the big creatures on our board if we happen to have him in the grave at all. Network Disruptor, when it enters the battlefield, we can tap a permanent. So, like, if our opponent happens to have a single flyer, we can bump this from the hand with a ninjutsu, or we can just drop this down, get rid of one of their flying blockers, and then swing with one of our other flyers. There's going to be 3 opponents on the board. The likelihood of us needing to do that is low. The biggest reason he's here is he costs 1 mana. Speaking of 1 mana blockers, Silver Raven, when it comes into the battlefield, scry 1. The Snare Master Sprite has flying, and you can pay 2 to tap a creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it when it comes out of play. Symmetry Mage, it has Magecraft, which we're never really going to use, but anytime that it... anytime we have an instant or sorcery get cast, we can give a creature we control, base power 2. But that's not really important for what we're doing. This is just basically a 1 mana O2 flyer. We're going to swing in, say, hey, is it blocked? No, okay, it's turning into a big boy. Fetid Imp, a 2 mana flyer that can gain Death Touch. We're going to use this to make sure that if our opponent's playing, like, say, a dragon deck, we're going to just use this to threaten the dragons. Swing the dragon at me and lose the dragon to my imp. We have Cridle of Baldur's Gate. This can make any of our creatures unblockable. So we can make our big creatures from later on in the game get unblockable, or Cridle can get unblockable himself. If he hits somebody, we can make them lose a life, then I gain a life, and then we scry 1. But let's be honest, most of the time, we're just going to make something unblockable, and we're going to ninjutsu it. Metropolis Sprite, 2 mana for a flyer. The extra ability isn't relevant to us. Triarch Praetorian. It has flying. When it enters the battlefield from a graveyard, we can draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. So this doubles as a draw spell for us. Not only is it a flyer that is going to get us stuff for Satoru Umezawa, but also because it has Unearth, if this dies to like a board wipe, or all of our hands get wheeled away, whatever, we can use Unearth to get it back from the graveyard, get that draw, and now it's ready to go to swing at our opponents and be more free stuff for us. The Vampire Interloper, it can't block, but it is a flyer. That's all that matters. Vaporkin can only block creatures with flying, but that doesn't matter. We just want to swing it in at people. The Meringue River Prowler, it can't be blocked, and it can't block, but we can cast it from the graveyard if we have a black or green permanent. So if we have our commander out, we can just cast this from the graveyard repeatedly. We don't care how many times this hits the grave. It's going to do jobs for us. So basically, with this deck, these are all the creatures we want to get out early so that we can swing them at our opponent. But what are we using to get payoffs with that? Well, let's go ahead and look at strategy 1. We have a pretty dense removal package. Some of these cards are cards we're going to use to defend our board state. Other cards are payoffs for our commander's ability. So let's go ahead and take a look at the 16 removal spells that we are running. Wash Away. This is a counter spell that can counter anything for 3 or a commander for 1. Feed the Swarm blows up blows up enchantments or creatures. Negate negates any type of non-creature spell. Resculpt can get rid of artifacts or creatures. It's really important when you're running a budget deck to try to run as much modular removal as possible, because we are using weaker versions of cards, so the cards need to be able to do more. Hagra Mauling can blow up any creature for 4 mana, and most importantly, it can flip and become a land, so we can use it in a pinch. Dalek Drone comes into play, it blows up a creature, then that person loses 3 life. It also has Flying and Menace, so we're going to use this as a secondary ninja to flip back into other creatures later. Baleful Beholder, when this comes into play, each opponent will sacrifice an enchantment. The reason that I included things like Baleful Beholder is I think it's important for even blue and black decks to have access to enchantment removal. There's a type of thought that I don't agree with in Magic, which is to let colors be good at what they do and only focus on those things. And I think that is basically missing the seeing the forest. Seeing the trees and missing the forest. That's the analogy, because sometimes you will lose because an opponent has an enchantment on the board that you can't interact with. Think things like Prismatic Bridge. You need to kill those cards, and if everybody else at the table is not running a deck that is particularly good at knocking those out, Goblin player over there, Mono Black player over there, you need to be the one that makes sure that player 4 isn't winning the game because nobody was responsible and brought removal. Kalitas Assassin, when it comes into play, becomes a clone of any creature on the board, then it blows up the creature who it cloned. So we're going to clone our opponent's best creature, and then we're just going to laugh maniacally. This also has Flash, so in the event we can't bring it out with Ninjutsu, we can also bring it out just with his Flash ability. Duplicant is a fun card. When it comes into the battlefield, exile any creature card, then Duplicate gains all the power and toughness that creature had, or rather, its power and toughness and creature type are identical to that creature. So there's another card we have that's going to do something similar, and it's different here. Noxious Gearhulk has Menace. When it comes into the battlefield, blow up any creature, and then you gain life equal to its toughness. Archfiend of Sorrows, when it comes into the battlefield, all your opponent's creatures get -2 and -2. This is a beautiful pseudo board wipe we have access to. Demon of Loathing, if it enters the battlefield and does combat to a player with our ninjutsu ability, we're going to force a player to sacrifice a creature. Then we have Dusk Mangler. When it comes into the battlefield, every opponent sacks a creature, discards a card, and loses 4 life. We want to take this and reuse it as many times as we can. So, like, you've got Dusk Mangler, and you want to reuse it by making sure that things like Cradle of Baldur's Gate are making it unblockable, therefore letting you bump it back into your hand with the Satoru Umezawa ability, so you can keep dropping this down over and over again and just harming people. And then Meteor Golem, when it comes into the play, blow up any non-land permanent an opponent controls. I have seen some comments about Meteor Golem saying that it's only good in budget decks and you shouldn't run it in decks that have like a sufficient amount of money they can put into them. I'm going to be honest, I disagree with that statement. I really do. There are decks that can abuse the hell out of Meteor Golem, blink decks, reanimation decks, decks that are cheating him into play like we're doing. I would be running Meteor Golem in this deck whether it was budget or not. Also, I just gotta be honest, again, sometimes you're playing a deck and you need access to removal that your colors normally are not good at doing. So having the ability to kill an enchantment in a black deck is a bit important, and Feed the Swarm is one way of doing that, and we want multiple. Overseer of the Dam, when it comes into play, destroy any target creature. When a creature an opponent controls dies, we can create a tapped 2/2 zombie token. We can then use those tokens to swing into our opponent as well and generate more advantage with Umezawa. And then the Phyrexian Ingester. When it comes into play, exile any non-token creature, and then he gains +X+Y, where X is their power and Y is their toughness. This card is silly. But if we're talking about big creatures, we need to be talking also about ramp. And this deck actually has a pretty robust ramp package because of the budgety nature of the deck. So surprisingly, we actually have a Soul Ring. This is the entire ramp package here. We get to start out with a Soul Ring. Can you believe it? Soul Ring, normally I can't fit into these budget decks because it costs so much money, $1.29, but that means a lot when you've only got $15 to play with. Soul Ring can actually go in here, though. Add 2 colorless mana. It doesn't help us with our commander as much, but it does help with our commander's ability in case we need it. So yeah, we can get Soul Ring in. It's cool. Wayfarer's Bauble, we can get lands out of the deck with it. Arcane Signet, it can tap for any of our deck's colors. Charcoal Diamond and Sky Diamond, we can get blue and black respectively. Fractured Power Stone, we don't care about the second line of text, it can just get us colorless mana. Guardian Isle, we don't care about the second line of text, it can get us colorless mana. Mind Stone, this can be a draw card when we need it, but it is mostly going to be used for that colorless mana. And Prismatic Lens, more colorless mana, and it can filter mana if we desperately need it, but it's a 2-color deck, and we've got an actually fairly robust land package too, so I don't think we're going to be needing that ability that much, but it's there. Now, there's a rule of thumb when it comes to mana, and that is make sure that your mana ramp always costs less than your commander if you can help it, because the turn that you can play your commander, you don't want to be playing ramp spells. Like, you don't want to do that. You want it to be, turn 1, play a creature, turn 2, ramp, turn 3, commander, turn 4, commander's ability happens. Like, that is our ideal set of scenarios. So normally, we would not have any 3-mana rocks, but I'm making one exception for the Dimir Key Rune. Now, this can tap for blue or black, but most importantly, we can make it become a blue-black horror creature that cannot be blocked until end of turn. So as an enabler for our commander's ability, surprisingly, this card actually does a ton of work for us. So I'm making an exception to that 3-mana rock clause here. The only 3-mana rock I didn't get to put in here is one of my favorites, the Honored Heirloom, but that's fine. We managed to get this one in. It's okay. So we also need to make sure that we're seeing cards in the deck, and there's 2 ways we're going to be doing that. One way is a basic way. We're going to be showing you the deck's draw package. Now, normally, you want to run about 10 or 12 draw cards. You want to have a pretty robust draw package, but our commander actually has a draw ability attached to it, so that means we can go down a couple of draw spells, and we don't have to rely super heavily on the draw. So the first one we have here is Divination, pay 3, draw 2. Quick Study, pay 3, draw 2, but at instant speed. Read the Bones, pay 3, scry 2, draw 2, then lose 2. Then we have Hostile Negotiations, exile the top 3 of our graveyard face down twice, and then we can pick one of those piles to flip face up, and then make an opponent choose door number 1 or door number 2. Do you want me to have the face up pile you know with 3 cards, or do you want me to have the face down pile you don't know with 3 cards? Which of these is more important to me? Then Fact or Fiction, it's the same type of ability. Reveal 5 cards, show them to an opponent. They separate those cards into 2 piles. You put one in your hand, the other in a graveyard. Make your opponent... Yeah, you want to play this card, and hopefully your opponent sees 2 big creatures they don't want, and they have to put them in 2 separate piles so that you get whichever one you wanted the most. Reconnaissance Mission, anytime a creature we control deals damage to a player, we can draw a card. And Biden of Thassa, same thing. When a creature we control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. Our deck is going to be going into the red zone repeatedly with our creatures, so ideally these will be making the draw of the deck increase exponentially. We also have a singular board wipe in the deck outside of the neg2 ability we had before, and that is Scourge of Fleets. When it comes into the play, return each creature your opponent controls with toughness X or less and put it in the opponent's hands, where X is the number of islands you control. Now, because we are a budget deck, we are in a unique position where we have a lot of cards that are typed island. Usually when you're building a commander deck, you've got your Shock Land, you've got the Sunken Hollow for this color combination, and then you really don't want to use much more than that in typed lands, so you end up putting in, your flip land, your reveal land, etc. You end up having a lot of dual lands that do not have types, but because we are a budget deck, we have to play more islands, and because we have to play more islands, we actually have a better Scourge of Fleets. It's actually pretty neat for us, but I mentioned that there's another way we're going to be gaining advantage in this deck, and that way is very, very, very simple. We are going to be going into the dungeon. This is our deck's initiative package. So for those who do not know what the initiative does, I'll go ahead and explain it real quick. It's honestly, it's a derpy mechanic, but we need to go over it. So let's go ahead and go into what the mechanic is so you know what we're going to be doing. So this is the Undercity. This is our token that we have to use to denote the initiative. Whenever we cast a spell or activate an ability that gives us the initiative, we gain functionally a crown like we would for Monarch that gives us the initiative, and it makes it to where we go into the first of these rooms. So we would go into the secret entrance, search our library for a basic land, reveal it, and put it into our hand. Then if we go into the dungeon again, or we take the initiative again, or we hold on to the initiative until our next upkeep, we get to take our choice between the next two rooms. We can either go into the left room to put counters on a creature, or go into the right room to scry 2. We're probably going to be scrying 2, though, let's be honest. Then every single time you initiate, the initiative, or you have your turn come around and you haven't been hit yet, or you steal the initiative from another player, you get to choose the next room you go into, but it must be a joining room going down, guided by the arrows. So if you're in the Lost Well, you can then go to Stash or Arena, but if you're in Forge, you can only go into Arena or Trap. And then finally, when you go to the end of the dungeon, you activate a massive ability that will it will tempo swing the game in our favor. So the Throne of the Dead 3 is the end ability for Undercity. Reveal the top 10 cards of our library, put any creature card from among them into the battlefield with 3/1/1 counters. It then gains hexproof until our next turn. So we're not just cheating creatures into the board with Umezawa's ability, we're also going to cheat creatures into the board with the Undercity, because we have a lot, and I'm saying a lot, of ways to make the initiative work. Let's go ahead and take a look at the initiative package here. Erakoa Sneak has flying, which is important for our deck already. We want to be able to bounce it to our hand repeatedly using Umezawa's ability, which has a secondary bonus with our deck. If this is going back to our hand, every time we play it, we get to do the initiative thing again. So this just helps us a ton. Ooh, sorry. Like I said, I'm sick. Passageway Seer gives us the initiative when it comes into play. At the beginning of our end step, we can get counters on it. Not super important, we're just going to ETB it. Ravenloft Adventurer is a stacks piece we have access to. It makes all the opponent's reanimation decks basically turn off, and then it has a hit counter ability, which we're not going to use that much. Again, it's mainly just ETB, get the initiative, and then stacks the opponent's graveyard with it. Vicious Battle Rager, when it comes into play, you get the initiative. If it becomes blocked by a creature, the opponent loses 5 life. This is a super cool card for us because our commander wants creatures to be unblocked, and if our opponents try to stop that strategy, the Vicious Battle Raider just burns them for having the audacity to block. Feywild Caretaker, get the initiative when it comes into play. At the beginning of your end step, if you have initiative, create a blue fairy token with flying, which we can then use to trigger our commander's ability again. Rilsa Rail Kingpin has Death Touch, so people aren't going to want to block it that often. When it enters the battlefield, get the initiative. When you attack, any creature gains Death Touch until end of turn, and if we have completed a dungeon, that creature also gains 5/0 and First Strike and Menace until end of turn. So this is going to make any of our creatures that are swinging in for the Umezawa ability, they're going to be harder to block because they're going to gain Menace, or one of our big guys that's already on the board, we can just give it 5/0 and Menace. So now it's clearing multiple creatures off the board, and it's just so much harder to deal with. This card is going to do a massive amount of work in this deck. Underdark Explorer, when it enters the battlefield, has initiative. You gain initiative. It also has Menace, so it can be unblockable for our commander's ability in a lot of situations. And then the most busted initiative card in all existence, Tomb of Horrors Adventure. When it enters the battlefield, you take the initiative. When you cast your second spell each turn, you are allowed to copy it. But if you complete a dungeon, copy that spell twice instead. So consider this scenario. Most of the cards in this deck fit into one of two categories. They are either really tiny, like these guys, and they can be our first spell for turn very easily, or they are very big, like these guys, because we are trying to get them for free. So we cast one of our little tiny guys, and then we cast one of our big guys, and then suddenly we have multiple copies of a Meteor Golem coming down, blowing up a ton of things, or multiple copies of a Baleful Beholder. Now we're making people sacrifice 2 to 3 enchantments on each of their boards, meaning we're getting a 1-for-9 off of just playing our deck normally. It's this card is nutty. If you've never played with this thing, it is a broken, busted, evil card. But let's go ahead and talk about how we're going to be getting some of our stuff back when we are fighting, because it's inevitable we're going to lose some of our cards. So we have Archpriest of Shadows as one of our reanimation creatures. When it comes into play, it backs up a creature, giving it a 1/1 counter, and then the following text: Death Touch. When this creature deals damage to a player, return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So, scenario: this is going to be hitting a person the turn it comes out all the time. Normally, the backup mechanic is made so that a creature doesn't have to do that, and then the creature that's already on the board has that ability, and then, you know, when it loses that ability in the next turn, it's fine because you have the creature on the board already. But Archpriest of Shadows is unique in that we're going to be getting it attacking because of what Umezawa says. So this comes into play. It sees a different unblockable creature. It gives it a 1/1 counter. They both hit an opponent, and then we just get two of our big creatures back out from the graveyard getting their broken, busted-ass ETB effects. The Archpriest of Shadows is a silly card. If you have not played it in... I used to run it in Kelsine. This card does a ton of work in the decks that it is built for. Then we have From the Catacombs. This is our 9th way of making the initiative happen. We can put a creature from any graveyard onto the battlefield under our control with a corpse counter. If the creature would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else. We can also escape this from our graveyard by exiling 5 cards from our graveyard. So we can use this over and over again to take creatures our opponents have, creatures that we want to reanimate, and every time we cast it from our graveyard, we are also gaining the initiative every single time. We're getting that basic land, we're getting those treasures, we are getting that top 10 cards of our deck, pulling a creature out for free. Then we have one recursion creature, the Vampire Charm Seeker. When it enters the battlefield, return an instant or sorcery card from our graveyard to its owner's hand. But most importantly, it has flying. So we get to use this over and over again. Anytime it makes contact with an opponent, we can just recycle that ability basically ad nauseum. But we're not trying to recast our spells only. We also want access to our opponent's spells. So let's look at the spell steal package. Yes, we are going in full on being a degenerate. We are going into dungeons that nobody understands. We are stealing people's cards and taking them away from them. We are bringing busted creatures onto the board that have, free cheated ETBs. We are not nice people when we are playing this deck. We are the problem of the table, and we will make it known. So first, let's look at Zareth San the Trickster. When it deals combat damage to a player, put any permanent from their graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. That's it. That's it. It has other text on it. None of that text matters. The only thing that matters is that line of text there. We're going to get its ability with Umezawa. It's going to be beautiful. Rexial, the Hidden Risen Deep. It has Island Walk and Swamp Walk, so it's very evasive for our commander's abilities. And also, when it deals damage to a player, cast any instant or sorcery spell from that person's graveyard without paying its mana cost, and then exile it. So somebody's like, hey, I casted this really busted draw spell. It's in my graveyard, though. And we're like, oh, that's cool. This thing's unblockable because of Umezawa. So it's hitting you once and it's getting your shit. And if I want to get more of your shit, I'm just going to hit you again with it. But if I want to reuse this ability later, then sure, I'm just going to bounce it back to my hand with its evasive maneuvers because it's literally built in a forge that said Satoru Umezawa. Deluvian Primordial, when it enters the battlefield for each opponent, take one of their instant and sorceries and play them without paying their mana costs. This it just comes into play for 4 mana and lets you cast 3 busted ass spells. We are playing a budget deck. We have limited access to cards. Our opponents are not playing budget decks. They don't have limited access to cards. So we are going to take their strong cards and beat them senseless with them. Then we have the Mind Leech Mass. It has Trample. It's a 6/6. When it deals combat damage to a player, look at that player's hand. Cast any spell from among those cards. So let's just say, scenario, our opponent's playing a card we don't have access to, Vampiric Tutor. They tutor up a really good card. It's on top of their deck. They haven't had a chance to play it yet. Or, they tutored to their hand with something. Mind Leech Mass punches the player with Umezawa flinging it in, for 4 mana. And we get to look at their hand and go, oh, that's a busted Bolus's Citadel. That must be what you tutored. Shame you didn't play it last turn. I guess I'll play it right now. And for free. And now I win. Like, this card's silly. This card is... We have access to so many silly things. And also, what's cool about decks like this? Let's say that you want easy access to cards, right? You want easy access to cards in your own deck. Guess what? We can run tutors too. We have the budget to run Hoarding Broodlord. It normally costs 8 mana, but of course we're cheating that the fuck in. Flying, when it enters the battlefield, search your library for any card, exile it face down. We can play it for as long as it remains exiled, which means people can't windfall it away from our hands or anything. All spells we have in exile have Convoke, so we can use our creatures to pay for them. Remember, all of our creatures are tiny, tiny guys. We can play them really easy and just be like, yeah, no, our creatures are paying for our big dudes that we were pulling out of the deck for free. Also, because this has flying, we can throw it back into our hand repeatedly with Umezawa's effect. So this is going to do a lot for us. I know I keep saying that certain cards do a lot of work in our deck, but I really, really mean it. We get to stretch what is considered fair and balanced Magic the Gathering when we play this deck. Now, there are 36 lands in this deck. This is the land package here. Let's go ahead and go over it. We have Ash Barrens. Remember, if you are playing lands, make sure that the majority of your lands come into play untapped, unless you have a reason for them to come into play tapped. So we have Ash Barrens, comes into play untapped, and it can basic land cycle. Esper Panorama comes into play untapped. It can search for the lands our deck has if we need to. Shire Terrace, Grixis Panorama, these are all doing the same thing. Promising Veins, all of these are, you know, colorless lands that can also search out the lands that our deck has. These are all really, really amazing cards. I hope their prices never go up. They shouldn't, but they are silly cards that we have access to. We don't have to play like we're playing a budget mana base with come into play tapped lands. We don't have to do that. We only have 2 lands that do that. One of them is Terramorphic Expanse, and the other one is Evolving Wilds, and that's just because they are the easiest turn 1/turn 2 ways to get the right mana that we need. Choked Estuary comes into play because we're playing so many basics. We can just reveal a swamp or island card to make sure it doesn't come into play tapped. Darkwater Catacombs, it's a filter land, so it's always going to be giving us exactly what we want. And River of Tears, this card allows us to have blue all the time, and if we played a land this turn, we have access to black. So if you need blue, tap it for blue and then play a land. If you need black, play a land, then tap it, and it will give you what you need that way. And then finally, we have a command tower, 14 islands, and 10 swamps, because all of our early game plays are blue, so we want more access to that blue mana early on. So this broken, busted, mean, and just all-around destructive deck is something you should be building. The final total of the deck, it came out to $15.24, so we are at $15.02. We are well within a decent margin of error for the deck. We're going to be drawing a ton of cards. We're going to be controlling the entire board. We are going to be making people frustrated because they need to attack our hand before they attack our board state, because our hand is where all of our important spells are, and we're just getting them out for free. Like, this is a silly, silly deck, and I would not have had a chance to mess with it had I not been introduced to the commander properly by having to mess around in the Buffalo Wild Wings with one of the guys from the card shop. I am happy that I did that because it made me go, huh, I bet I can build this guy for under 15, and I bet I can make it really, really cruel. So yeah, I have a feeling that when you're playing this deck, you will not feel like it's a budget deck. There's nothing about how this deck runs that feels budget when I've goldfished it. So have at it, build the deck. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Let me know what commanders you might want to see in the future. I am addicted to building these things. I have a problem, and instead of therapy, I am seeking Magic the Gathering. So, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Hit the like if you haven't already, subscribe if you haven't already, and as always, everybody, insert end video tagline here.
Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability a Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Blitzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Mabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sagitt, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.